Welcome to SpanReads, not your typical rereads podcast, a 17th chart series where we reread the Cosmere and are giant nerds about it. Unlike the traditional reread style, we won't be going through each book chapter by chapter, but instead looking at different themes and the placement of the books within the wider Cosmere. Each SpanReads series will bring you 4 episodes, the first 3, reactions and retrospectives, character relationships, and magic system use in the story, will be spoilers for that book and prior books in the series. Then we'll cap things off with a full spoiler Cosmere episode. Today, we are talking about Oathbringer. I'm Ian, and joining me is David.
Hi, I am Windrunner on the forums and Discord.
Joshua.
They call me Jofwu, something like that.
And Eric.
Hey, I'm subbing in because Mish couldn't be here, and I read this book in a week. What's up? I'm Cass.
And I'm Weiry. So, spoiler warning, this episode will have spoilers for The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, Edge Dancer, and Oathbringer only. So, reactions and retrospectives. What did you think of the book, guys?
Man, what a killer ending to this book. Like, Oathbringer has a fond place in my heart because this is when we really got into doing Shardcast and stuff. So it was all Oathbringer time. So I remember us talking a lot about this book. And I think at the time I said that this book was better than Words of Radiance, in my opinion. And I don't know if that's still true, but I didn't reread Words of Radiance for this show. So I still say Oathbringer's pretty tight. And a lot of the things that I thought were kind of some issues that we had in retrospect, I'm like, I like the love triangle, which I didn't expect. I think it's good. So we'll probably talk about that extensively in the character episode. But there's a few things that are weird, but I really like how smooth and elegant this book was in expanding the scope of Stormlight. Like, our characters at the beginning have no idea. They're like, oh man, we totally fought the Voidbringers at the Battle of Narok. I'm like, oh, that's cute. No, you didn't. And just like really expanding with all the fuse and all the crazy stuff and the unmade, right? Like, we get so many unmade. It's ridiculous. And I really like how it came together. I think it is pretty awesome. I love Kaladin, failing in Kholinar as his squads, they go kill each other. And it hit, man. And Shallan's like mental breakdown of like creating the altars, right? Because Vale wasn't really an altar in Words of Radiance, right? But this is where she's really attributing more to Vale and more to Radiant and like going between them, which I think worked really well for me because she had a very traumatic time dealing with that she killed her mom in Words of Radiance. And like the scene with her and Wit in Kholinar, oh man, like there's some really top tier stuff. And we also like expanded Bridge 4. It's good. I like it.
Counter to that.
Okay.
Oathbringer is probably my least favorite of the 4 books that are published at this time. Still a 5 out of 5 star book. I like the book. I think it has a lot of moments that are really amazing. Overall, to me, there's just like a lot of stuff that's very slow and frustrating. And I experienced that on this time reading. I really kind of went into this read trying to kind of pay attention to some of those things, especially Kaladin and Shallan, just like curious to kind of break apart why they are frustrating to me. And so I spent a lot of the book looking at them, especially, I think, just trying to understand that better. But the finale is it might be the strongest Stormlight finale. Things all come together to the one location, to one place, more so than in a bigger way than every other book. And I think that's really satisfying. There's a lot of things like the build up for Teft, for example, in the end. That's just sort of there's just a few crumbs like along the way, right? And then it comes to this, and then his story plays into the bigger story that's happening. So there's like a lot of things like that.
Very smooth. It's nice when things get foreshadowed in the book.
So I think that there's a lot of little things that all come together to this big finale that I think is really, really satisfying. I think that I would get frustrated by Kaladin and Shallan's failure in this book. Like to some extent, like I understand, like that was kind of needed. Like you can't have every book end with Kaladin swears another ideal and saves the day again. Like it's a frustrating, I guess, issue with kind of the bigger picture story arc of the series, but it's still just something about their story is frustrating to me. I feel like they spend most of the book just sort of spiraling down, and then they just sort of hit the ground and there's like a poof, Wile E. Coyote style, and then that's the end of the book. It's just not a very satisfying ending to me for them. Some things that are like set up for them earlier in the book that don't pay off for me as much as I would hope.
Oathbringer has that feel that it's like setting up like the entire rest of the series, you know, because it's like really expanding things in such a wide way, right? Because
yeah, that's one of the things that I really enjoy about it, though, is that it is such an expansion of like the world too, like very literally, where we're like we've heard little bits about these countries, but now these characters are coming together and we're actually going to these places regularly instead of. There's such a narrow like focus on in the setting for the first two books, you know, and that very much gets dropped with this and kind of makes it start feeling even more like epic fantasy. I like Kaladin failing. That's always really fun for me because he, you know, it's just a much needed break. And I definitely get that. I get how that could be frustrating though. His early chapters coming home to Hearthstone, amazing.
Oh yeah.
Amazing. Even with some of the tension of like, where are the Voidbringers? What are they going to be like? Kind of not being present. I was very engaged in him seeing his family. I love the Shadesmar side trip. I know that's like a huge pacing complaint people have, but I remember the very first time that I was reading it when they pop, it cuts to them in Shadesmar and you're like, oh, this is after Secret History had come out and all this stuff. And we're like, okay, this is going to be a little bit of Stormlight Secret History. Like we're going into Shadesmar. Like,
yeah, it's like that's one of the coolest thing that happens in this book. So when people are like, "It sucks," I'm like, "Are you reading the same series I am?" Like, what?
I was never bothered with I don't know. It doesn't. I get a little bit frustrated with the mood that Kaladin and Shallan are in when they're in Shadesmar, but like I don't know, seeing it I think is fun. And even the first time I read the book, I was engaged. I was kind of, I guess, enjoying that setting more than Dalinar sort of dealing with his fallout from his memories.
Dalinar and his memories, that's a very interesting thing because like once we see the rift again, like we don't really see Dalinar in the present for like quite some time in the book because he's just like, oh yeah, I'm not good. Like we get like 2 drinking chapters basically. And it's interesting.
And I say that there's not a whole lot of like Dalinar with his memories in part 4 because it opens up in part 4 and you get Navani chapters with her leading the coalition. You get the Zeth chapters. So that
true.
Part of the reason I think that it feels like maybe it slows down is like the story kind of balloons to a bunch of different POVs at that point.
Yeah,
it's true.
Because you need to give Dalinar time because you need to progress time, but Dalinar is spending most of that time drunk. Yeah. And that's not going to be pleasant to read. So it's like, we're going to focus on some other people right now. For me, rereading this book, because I don't think I have since reading Rhythm of War. It's been a while. And Rhythm of War is still my favorite Stormlight book because they're for a spectrum of reasons that are all very personal taste reasons. But reading Oathbringer from a more writerly perspective, I like the structure of this book the most. All Stormlight books are like plotted as a trilogy, but that means different things for different books. And like this one, it's just like 3 books in sequence with 3 climaxes. And I like that. Each one deals with like different unmade, and it's nice.
I think I agree with that. The pacing in the book frustrates me a little bit. I think that Oathbringer Part 2 is my single most frustrating Stormlight part, because I love all the Bridge 4 POVs, but it's just so slow to me.
You don't like Shallan regressing with Yasna there? It's like, okay, that's fair. I can understand why someone's frustrated with that.
So Part 1, fantastic. Kaladin and Hearthstone, finding out the Voidbringers, that's great. Shallan facing Shallan spiraling in Part 1, I think is really kind of fun it's kind of scary to watch. I like that. And leading up to Midnight Essence, that's really cool. Dalinar, if I'm not mistaken, that kind of ended with his memories all of a sudden coming back, and I guess he made some progress with Taravangian by the end of it. Part 1 is great, but then it hits Part 2 and the book just slows to a crawl to me all of a sudden, and it's hard to get that pace going again. Even into Kholinar, it feels really slow at first until you have that climax.
Yeah, so and that does make sense to me. It also does, going back to people complaining about the Shadesmar interlude, because it's parts 2 and 4 are directly after we've just had a climax. So we've hit a high point and now we have to drop back down to start building up to the next one. So I understand that can be a little jarring. It's oh, we were going and now we're at a standstill again. Just but
I can understand that, but I feel like after those climaxes, you do need some breathing room. And I can understand why, oh man, the pacing is slower, but I also think it's necessary and builds to bigger things, having the Bridge 4 stuff, with Teft saving the day at the very end, right? I think that's really beautiful and great.
Yeah, I think it just feels the most, especially Part 2, the most like a pivot out of almost any part in the whole series, where you're all right, this is a transition part where we're getting, we're done with that previous thing, and we need Bridge 4 to be training with their powers. So we need a few weeks to be going by, and there's just a lot of stuff that's built into it structurally.
There's a really hard pivot with Kaladin, right? He's doing one thing and then he comes back in Part 2 and it's okay, now we're doing something totally different.
And there are no Kaladin POVs in Part 2. You get the Bridge 4 instead, which that's interesting to get all of these external POVs on him.
There's a pretty hard pivot with Yasna's return and what that does to Shallan's character. She has a really victorious moment, right? And then she even says, I think when the book starts, she's oh, I'm feeling on top of the world at the end of Part 1, and then she comes into Part 2 and Yasna's back and she's oh, my life is in pieces, I don't know what's going to happen.
That's true. I just,
like I said, Kaladin and Shallan, that's what frustrates me the most, I think, in the book.
But it's just, man, there's such clever little foreshadowing with the Midnight Mother being trapped and then freed, and the Taravangian scenes. It's oh, you have to get a spren with something it knows intimately, and things with Ashertmarn saying give me your pain and stuff. Just just really nice and elegant there.
Or even in Kholinar, Shiana, the corrupted spren.
Yes.
Also feeding into the reveal that Gliss is corrupted or enlightened.
Yeah. And
there are multiple scenes of Yasna getting the depiction of the Mist Spren, having suspicions about Renarin, of something being off with Renarin, and having how that builds to her confrontation of him, where she almost kills him. It's it's so good.
It's so good. And I thought Kholinar would drag for me, because I feel most people think it's oh man, Kholinar is what really slows down. But I didn't have that problem. I do think Part 2 is probably the slowest. That one was okay, we got to get through Dalinar's like doing the visions. That's what he's doing in that one, like talking with the leaders in the visions, and then Odium shows up. It's like once Odium shows up, I'm like, I'm all right, we're good, we're in here. But like it takes a while, you know, because part one's huge, and then part two takes a while. Yeah,
it's like the breaking it into 5 parts, but 3 books. Part 1 is a book.
Yep,
and then it's 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And they all do feel very distinct, each of the 5 parts, which is another thing I like. Sometimes in other books, they kind of blur into each other, which is meh. Whereas these each feel very distinct in my mind.
Like each main character's doing something different in each part. Like part 2 almost solidified that for me, where it's like all of Dalinar's main POVs, they're all just visions, and like he's doing different things, but like it gives it a different feel for that part, which is interesting. Which it just, it's nice keeping the variety up.
I think for me, Dalinar does kind of is not quite that distinct. I'm having a harder time like remembering like what was Dalinar doing in part 2. Like
Dalinar is the most difficult one, but it's like broadly speaking dealing with the Midnight Mother part 1.
Yeah.
Then it's like Bridge for Time. It's like the lead up to the return to Kholinar. Then it's like dealing with Kholinar. Then it's Shadesmar, and then it's the climax of the book.
With Dalinar, I think I can understand that because it's a lot of like coalition building, right? So part 1, he's like, all right, let's try and talk with the coalition. Oh, that didn't really work. Oh, we can put them in visions. Okay, that's part 2. And then we're doing that. But like he's doing the same thing, but just in a different way, right? So from a writer's perspective, it was interesting. It's like, oh, we're just straight up going into visions. And I feel like Brandon really gets the scene transitions really smoothly, getting into different scenes. It's like, yep, we're just doing this now. Like, okay, cool. And I gotta give shout out to the Rift. I think like it's so interesting in part 1 where you see Kadash is like, yeah, man, the Rift is pretty bad. Then we get the chapter called The Rift, which is not the actual Rift thing, but it's a good like thing to say, like, oh yeah, I mean he killed the kid, like Kadash didn't like that. Yeah, sure. But then we get the actual Rift chapter, and oh man, it is haunting. Like it hit just as hard.
And something I had forgotten actually rereading it was just how immediate Dalinar's was like, oh wait, no, like let them out. Like this is too much. And Xenius is like, no, I lit the fire from the bottom too, so they're all gonna die.
It's like literally too late. Like you cannot move that stuff that quickly. It's like, yep.
Oh, Sadius, and he would too. Like he would be the guy. He's like, well, sorry, I already lit the stairs. Like
I'm following orders, man. And it's like, honestly, when you're following Blackthorn Dalinar's orders, like, I mean, I can't even fault Sadius that much there. I'll be honest.
It feels like and he like saw the opportunity. And he was like, oh, I can be a real awful person here.
Yeah.
Permission.
Oh yeah. If you're gonna tell someone like Sadius to light a city on fire, he's not gonna mess around. Like
Speaking of that, did we ever get any concrete thing of the actual High Prince that was like working with Tanalan? Because like Gavilar said a thing. That like, there's one.
I don't think there was one.
There wasn't. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Or if there was, it never became relevant to the plot. Who that was? Probably like Sabarial.
My interpretation of it was like that they were like maybe spreading that rumor to like mess with them.
Yeah, make them like look internally of like who can we trust. Meanwhile, you can trust all of them.
I guess I just wouldn't put it past any of the Alethi High Princes to like be like, yeah, I'll fund a competitor. Like that, I could use that, you know.
That is the garbage that they constantly do.
I was like thinking like when Gavilar dies and like because you have the flashback with like the funeral. And they're like, oh, we're going to do the Vengeance Pact. I was like, man, it's a miracle that this kingdom did not just totally collapse when
That's true. That's true.
Elhokar is not that king, and like Dalinar is a total mess right now. Like, why are they together? Like, it was all, I guess, Sadeas pretty much is like the one that kept the kingdom together.
I think if Gavilar had just dropped dead, it would have definitely, kingdom would have imploded. The fact that he was assassinated, it was like the Alethi were all like, no, like we can do that to each other. Like you can't do that to us. So like, screw you. We're coming after you.
Yeah.
At least, and that lasted long enough for them to swear Vengeance Pact, which kind of forces them to stick together. And that just gives more time for cultural momentum.
It's a good thing that it gave them a chance to go fight a new war, because if they didn't have a new war to fight.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, and then they immediately find the gem hearts and turn it into like essentially 10 competing armies. Like, like it's not like they're incredibly unified out there. They're just like, it has to be profitable for us to remain here.
But like it would have turned to civil war without that. Like at least they're going somewhere else.
Yeah.
So, but it does explain a lot of the situation when we see, part 2 of Way of Kings, just all the Alethi BS and politics that's happening. Like that actually makes a lot of sense. That is exactly how the Alethi would go. One disappointment for me, diagram. I think the diagram was not as cool as in Words of Radiance, and it did not live up to that promise. It's fine, I guess, but
Brandon has a bad habit of setting things up at the end of previous books that are immediately discarded. And Graves in the diagram in this book.
Amarim.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about Amarim. Yes, I would also say Amarim's a big problem. But I wasn't even referring to Moash and Graves, although that is an aspect to it. Mm-hmm. But just like how it plays out with Taravangian, like, just thought it'd be cooler.
Yeah, it is set up as such like they know the future. They're pulling the strings, like they're and they never seem like they're particularly ahead of anybody. Like they're like a second tier or like a step above the Sons of Honor in terms of just completely being like a ridiculous group of people. Yeah. But they like with the Ghost Blood sitting there, everyone comes across unfavorably.
Yeah, because like there are a few Taravangian POVs, and they're talking about like the stuff they have to do that all fails because Dalinar comes out on top because it's his book. But
right, yes.
I mean, Taravangian doesn't know that. And then we get the scene at the end with the meeting with Odium, and like I do like that past Taravangian had left the message for future, now present Taravangian to use like during the negotiation. Like that's like, yes, this is the cool thing about the diagram. You should do that more.
You should do that more. And maybe I also just thought that the diagram's plan was bad. It's just like unite them and then just negotiated away with Odium. I'm like, I guess that makes sense, but I thought your plan would suck less than this. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. His plan really is like do Dalinar's thing, but I'm in charge. And like he's like, I want to unite the world, but I should be the one calling the shots here.
Yeah.
But I know.
Well, in his defense, I think that like Dalinar is gonna like fight for. I don't know that Dalinar like has the same criteria of when he's going to quit as Taravangian.
Oh, for sure. No, Taravangian's like, I'll save a part of the world, and that's going to be good enough. And Dalinar's going to try to like every inch of ground we will keep. But also, it's definitely a strategic difference for sure.
Dalinar is a risky bet because, I mean, there was a considerable chance of him becoming Odium's champion.
This is fair point.
Well, we don't want to put all of our horses, all of our chickens in his basket, because if he flips, we're screwed. So I'm not going to become Odium's champion.
one thing I did not appreciate as much, like in my first read or two of this book, and I really was just amused by it this time, was like the outside perception of Dalinar and the Alethi by all these other nations out there. Like they're just complete warmongers, right? And so there's also like an element of that, like Dalinar has no reason to trust Dalinar's ability to like lead this coalition in a way that's he sets a good example in this book, right? But it's 2 months together does not like give a whole lot of confidence.
I do love that all the nations seeing Dalinar as a warmonger, and then you're seeing the flashbacks. It's like that makes a lot of sense. Like that's one of those like clever cultural things of like, yeah, the Alethi would do that. Like that makes sense that they would think that way, where that feels very realistic.
Yeah, and we also like that touches on the thrill being very present in Alethkar for who knows how long.
Yeah.
And then like kind of gets touched on with the newly awakened singers being culturally of the countries they were in. So like the Alethi singers are also super aggressive and totally willing to fight and seize a city. And the Thaylen singers being like, we're just going to go on the boats and go away. Bye.
Got the boats.
And then the Azish singers being like, here's where your law says you did us wrong. Fix it.
I do love that mystery in the beginning of what are the Voidbringers, and you're just like, what is happening? Like it, and our characters are confused. Dalinar is confused. Love it. And then they're just playing cards, and then you hear about the fused and stuff, and it's like, oh yeah. And then you see Odium, and Dalinar makes a good point. Yeah, Odium is not going to let them just have peace, and that's a good call, Dalinar. That's fair.
Yeah, I think having the singers be like reflective of their nation's culture was a smart decision too, because it further reinforces that they have an equal right to the land. Like it literally is also their homeland, as in the same way it is the people. So there really isn't an easy answer when when Dalinar's in the vision, like with Venli, and he's like, we could make one singer a high prince, maybe, and you're like, well, that wouldn't even be fair. Like,
It is really satisfying that like gives them like some kind of culture, because if you don't do that, then it just comes across as like, oh, the singers,
they're a
monolith.
monolith.
This giant monoculture, which is just not great.
Which the fused have that.
Yeah. And
so like now they have to come back, and it's like, why aren't you acting like good singers?
No. And Venli's position as being like a person who's kind of trying to like create like a new founding myth for the singers as a culture, like that kind of cool propaganda campaign that Odium is embarking on. That was definitely something I didn't expect and always kind of enjoy as being Venli's plot for the book.
Love Venli's stuff here. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of Venli, we have to talk about Eshni randomly actually being dead, because like reading Words of Radiance, it's like, well, we didn't see the body, obviously she's alive, and then we find her body and it's like, oh wait, she's dead.
Is that a decision Brandon made later? I always feel like in my mind I believe that he like decided like, I think she's actually dead, but I don't know if that's actually true or not.
I want to say, I don't know if he's ever like specifically commented on it, but I have to believe that's the case.
I think enough people complained about fake out deaths in Words of Radiance that he's like, I probably can't do another one, because it's like, what we had Syl, there were more. Yasna, right.
I almost wonder if he wrote it ambiguously so that like in Words of Radiance, so that when he got around to Oathbringer, he could kind of like make a call, one way or the other, depending on how he was feeling at the time.
Very possibly, but like he had always spoken of like Eshni being one of the flashback characters, and like he had spoken somewhat about like, oh, like don't take that as a guarantee people are going to survive until their book. But then, and so like we do in Rhythm of War get the Eshni flashbacks that are less Eshni flashbacks as Eshni and Venli flashbacks. I do wonder if Venli's whole arc was always part of the plan, or if Eshni was supposed to take that role and then he decided to give it to Venli instead.
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible. And honestly, I still think that's a good move. Like, I think Venli's very interesting for having caused all of this, really. And then getting those seeds of regret as we move along until she gets Timbre in her gem heart. I really enjoyed Venli's stuff. All her interludes were great.
So we've touched a little bit on things we didn't like, but what were people's least favorite things during this revisiting of the book? Because mine is definitely, as it always has been, Amaram.
I think Amaram's up there for me. Yeah.
It's the fact that he just goes full cartoon villain at the end, and it's not foreshadowed. Because like the whole somewhat interesting thing in like Way of Kings and Words of Radiance is that Amaram didn't think he was the bad guy. He was like, this is necessary for like the good of the planet. And then at the end of this book, he's just like, ho ho ho, I'm evil now.
I'm Crystal Monster Amaram.
And it's like, I just wish we could have gotten an interlude from Amaram that like hinted at something.
Anything.
Yeah. Well,
a voice in his head. Like it's just like, because he went from like anti-villain to villain with like no justification, and it's just like, why?
They should. I wish Brandon had made Eli like give her his role. Like, because I would, if she went crazy, like I would totally been like, sure, whatever. But like, I love Amaram's like setup as this guy who does, questionable things because he's very similar to Taravangian, right? In this kind of, ends justify the means, and it was such a compelling like antagonist, and the antagonist who's like with the the protagonists, and it was just kind of like, I don't know, Brandon just kind of threw it away, I guess, that he just didn't decide he wasn't going to do anything else with him. I don't know, he could have been a cool character going forward.
It just so feels like that is one of the things where Brandon's like, I need a rule of cool thing, just a thing for Kaladin to fight, and so he's gonna put the cool thing in there even if it doesn't make sense. And I think, and I can kind of see what Brandon's going for, because he's going for this like, Amaram made the wrong choice that Dalinar didn't make, right? And so like thematically, he's on the bad guys team. And so he then flips to the bad guys team. Like, I think you really have to like be thinking about that thematic element. But like, it's just not in the book. Like,
it would have worked if Brandon had shown that.
And I think he just didn't show it because he didn't want to spoil the thing that Odium's trying to do that, right? Like, I think that's why he's doing that. And it just kind of kills me, because you read Amaram's stuff and he's like angry, and so it's like you can kind of see maybe a little bit, but an interlude would have helped a lot. Even in part 4, before the Battle of Thalen Field, where Amaram is arguing with Dalinar, I'm like, I mean, he just sounds like regular old Amaram, and he'd never had that Odium aspect in his like epilogue-y thing in Words of Radiance. Like, that wasn't there at all.
No.
Right.
Well, the funny thing is, he's like the most religious out of them. Like, he's kind of the most like faith in the heralds guy. So I'm like, you got the guy who believed this stuff religiously to join essentially join demons from his own theology.
Yeah.
I was like, I really like, I would need even more justification to get him here than the average character, not less.
Fanfic territory. The Amaram interlude is Odium showing that the heralds lied. right?
That'd be great.
Like, I think that would, and then you like get this hint where he's like doubting what he's doing and like hearing screams of like the people he killed. Like that would be enough for me. Like I think that would be great. Because like it's just done off screen. I was like, oh man.
Yeah, and you can still preserve like the real surprise is, oh my god, the whole army's flipping. So you can have like, oh man, like we know that Amaram's loyalty is wavering, but we shouldn't be trusting him in this battle. But like you don't realize the extent of it until the army flips too, and you're like, oh, like I don't think that us knowing Amaram was being tempted could necessarily had to undermine that moment at the end. Like I think it could have been done right.
We could have got this interlude instead of Scheller.
Oh,
but we need to.
Well, we needed to set up the Mink, though.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's like I also think we could have done an Amaram interlude without ruining the crystal monster reveal. Like that, we could still do that. Like it's silly, but like again, it's like another unmade that Brandon wants to introduce. That.
It also like part of it is like giving Kaladin something to do in the finale. Like he's already failed. Like he's not going to do his normal like hero thing. You got to give him something to do. And like Amaram is, they've been set up as, opposing one another. And I guess Brandon's like looking at his outline and he's like, oh, there's no room for like them to have a confrontation later down the line. So we just got to do it now.
Yeah.
It's like some better setup would have been.
Yeah. Like Kaladin has to move past the mortal antagonist to the immortal antagonists. So like, so I do get that. And also we need to have Rock kill somebody so he can have weird stuff going on with him.
Yeah, that will one day be resolved.
Yes. It's Amaram's an interesting one. I think I definitely get pulled through the ending with just everything in part 5 up to Immunity is just like 10 out of 10. I do, maybe even 11 out of 10. Yeah, it's great. I do think there's a lot of fighting after the Immunity, and I'm like, I don't know how into it I sometimes am on this, but
So as the person who finished rereading this morning, and took a break right when we hit Immunity to go take a shower. There's still 100 pages after Immunity until the end of the book.
Yes. There's that the Spear That Won't Break chapter. That's a long chapter. I get the critiques because it's Brandon's just going for rule of cool, where it's just like, oh, that's fighting for them, and like
that. Yeah. See, that would be my thing. Is my constant. I know. I have finally got myself in a place where I'm like, okay, like they see him fighting for them, and they're like, well, he's not actively attacking us right now. But the swiftness with which everyone accepts the assassin in white is alive and is on their team is astounding to me.
Like one of the funny things is Yasna regionally is very like prim and proper. Like doesn't swear, and like at one point she says, and apparently the storming assassin in white. Like
it's so weird that it's Yasna saying it, right?
Yeah. She's like, you killed my dad.
You killed my dad. It's like no conversation.
It's like, oh yeah, this is the thing that causes her composure to break in that way, and I'm like, yeah.
Characters killing each other's family members and not talking about it, just a general theme in the Stormlight Archive.
Hey,
I mean, one of like the small things I noticed is like in the Kaladin Amaram fight scene when Amaram is dual wielding, he refers to the blade as Halloran's blade. I'm like, dude, you need to talk to Shallan about this.
Yeah,
this really needs to happen.
That entire ending of Oathbringer gave me a lot of Avengers Endgame vibes, and I know this came out first and things, but it very much hit the superhero but in a fantasy universe type vibe. And I know we've talked, David, I think you're like, oh, this is the 10 people and here's the main characters. No, I think that was Matt actually in Cosmere Beats. That was Matt. He said that.
That is Matt. Yeah.
That's a good episode. I'll put it a card for that.
Yeah,
that's tight. But I don't know. I like it. It's just that level of cheesy that I frickin' love it. Where
something maybe destiny.
Maybe destiny.
I guess
Talon showing up and then just noping out is weird. Like there's some weirdness.
That's what I was gonna say. It's the heralds walking up to be like, and we're gonna be flashback characters too, don't you know? Like, like don't forget about us. We're not ready to do anything yet, but
yeah, and so I think we're being a little hard on this because there is some weirdness, and maybe Words of Radiance is overall a better book. But man, I really love this book. This is a really good book, and yeah, I guess you kind of just need to roll with the rule of cool. And you know what worked for me?
Yeah.
I'm just swept along into Everstorm, and it's awesome. Hell yeah.
Okay, so what are people's favorite single moments in the book? I think mine is the confrontation between Jasnah and Renarin. When Renarin's on the ground, like, oh, Jasnah's gonna kill me now. I'm sad, but like, it's for the best. And like, he nods at her, and Jasnah is just like, I can't kill him. And then Renarin being happy that he's not dead, but also like the happiness of like, wait, what I see can be wrong, leading into the you cannot have my pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's so beautifully laid out scene by scene, and just it's so good.
For the sake of picking something different, because that moment's probably my top moment. Let me cheat and do two in the finale, because there's so many good moments in the finale.
Absolutely.
Just Teft swearing his ideals in the finale, absolutely amazing. To pick something earlier in the book, I love Shallan with the Ghost Bloods, like in part 1 when she like goes in, or no, not the Ghost Bloods, but like the random people, like the scene where she like stabs through her hand. That scene, every time I'm like, this is just amazing.
She's insane. Like, I love it. That's some of Shallan at her best, where she's trying to do that and just using Stormlight and hurting people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think to pick it, and a similar way to pick one that I think is not a typical one. Elhokar dying, great moment in this book. Like that is such a huge like moment where you're like, oh, like this is Brandon is not going with the happy direction. He is, we are heading down a really dark path right now, and just something you don't see a lot in Stormlight books or Brandon books, where somebody really is doing everything right and doing their best and loses anyway.
Yeah,
because it is very much like you see him like start to swear. It's like it there is an upswell there of like, oh, this is so good. Like, Elhokar is like finally like making progress, and then it's like, nope.
Moash shoves Gavinor with his foot, the famous
gentle shove,
onto him,
and then stabs him.
Holding the spear in there till the Stormlight glow vanishes, and you're like, all right, well, that's that.
I love that Brandon played with it, with Vinley swearing hers, and makes her like not quite say the third one for like a couple pages before.
Yep. I was gonna say Teft. I think that was the part that really that got me and made me cry again. I really like that. I also really like Dalinar saving Kaladin and with the I'm Unity moment. And just to be clear, my top moment is the I'm Unity moment. Let's be perfectly clear. Like, it is so awesome. We're not just not talking about Dalinar here. I thought Dalinar's arc was just so good. Oh, but shout out to the Cultivation Dalinar scene, because that was badass every single time. Of just, I deal with everything that grows, and that includes the thorns. I'm like, it's so good.
I forgot that she like sort of like the trees like grab him and like send like roots into his pores and stuff. It's so creepy.
There's like a lot of like almost body horror stuff with like the unmade, and like that really adds to that, where it's like, oh, this is like kind of terrifying actually, which I really like, makes this book feel darker, which I like, which adds to like the Alethkar stuff, right?
The massive heart overgrowing the Oathgate platform.
And then like honorary shout out to, no, I'm the other one.
Yes.
It's like reading that for the first time.
I will always remember you being like, did you guys finish part 2? I will always remember you saying that, Ian.
I was in the beta for that, and I was one of the first people to finish that part, and I'm like waiting and messaging Eric. I'm like, you done yet?
I remember exactly where I was reading that and then messaging you. Like I know exactly where I was, and so I will always remember that. But yeah, Odium was really cool. I really like seeing Odium. I never would have expected in book 3 of a 10-book series that we just see the bad guy and just have such a massive fight. And I think maybe that's why Oathbringer is just like, oh, okay, we're just pulling out all the stops, even if sometimes the rule of cool doesn't make sense, like Amaraman said. But that's fine. I'll forgive it.
Well, then, thank you for watching. You can find us at 17thshard.com for all the news, discussion, theories, and fun that you could ever want. You can find us on social media, SoundCloud. You can leave us a review on iTunes. You can subscribe on YouTube, and you can also support us on Patreon. See you next time. Bye.
Peace.
Bye.